So flying an FPV drone is one of the best, most exhilarating experiences you can have, as when you're in the goggles, you literally feel like you're a bird in the sky flying, not to mention the insane footage you can get from a drone like this that cannot really be achieved with any other piece of filmmaking gear. However, whilst flying FPV is all fun and games, the learning experience is not the easiest. And me in particular, I definitely struggled on this journey when I started 5 years ago. So that is why I've stuck together this video for anyone looking to get started with over an hour's worth of content, so you can go from FPV 0 to FPV hero, or at least be off the ground and in the air without too much fuss. In this video, we're going to learn how to get started into FPV the right way without any shortcuts, how you can unlock the most cinematic footage possible, whether you should get a DJI avata drone to start or a traditional FPV drone, how you can do the best thing in FPV, which is fly through gaps, and also how you can learn to chase vehicles with your FPV drone. Lastly, we're also going to look into top tips on how you can also become a freestyle FPV professional as well as a cinematic pro. Okay, first up, you need to start on a simulator. No negotiations on this. For this, you just need a controller. Right now, I'd recommend either the TBS Mambo FPV RC controller if you do prefer something a little bit bigger, or the TBS Tango 2 radio or Radio Master Zorro if you prefer a more PlayStation type grip. Definitely stay away from the TX16S. I had this radio and let me tell you, it's a nightmare for a beginner and also just unnecessarily big.
That's what she said.
When holding the controller, I definitely recommend pinching the sticks, as I find it easier for finer controls, but the thumbs, if you feel comfortable, is totally fine as well. Also, get one of these. This is a lanyard that goes around your neck, and you may think, why would I need one of those? Trust me, from my experience, it's just nice to have your controller sitting around your neck while you're doing your FPV drone flying, rather than having to put the controller down all the time when you want to change your batteries, tighten some screws, or even just punch the ground out of pure frustration after you crashed again. Probably the worst way I could have crashed is from right at the top of the tower all the way down. You can then just simply hook up your controller that you've bought onto an online simulator. I chose Liftoff and it worked great for me, but also another one I'd recommend is Velocidrone. Acro versus Angle. Make sure you do your training in Acro mode, as this is the mode that, although it is the hardest, is what true FPV pilots use to be able to fly with full manual control over their drone and have it respond to your stick movements fully, which for example means if you roll to the left a bit, you need to then roll back in the other direction to level out the drone. There is another mode called angle mode, which is easier as it levels itself out after you stick input, similar to a Mavic drone perhaps, but for me it's just pointless to learn to fly in this mode. Trust me, in the beginning, when you start in the sim, you might feel like you will never get the fact that going forward means you need to pitch your drone forward and control the throttle at the same time. This took me a little while to understand. Once you get your head around that and just practice flying straight and banking corners, you will feel good. You can then start to understand a few other maneuvers, such as lowering the pitch stick and increasing the throttle so you can fly up. And then one of the scariest things when starting FPV, which is letting the throttle down completely so that you just drop. Understanding the relationship between the throttle pitch roll and yaw basically is your goal here in the simulator. So when you're outside and take off for the first time, you can feel comfortable enough to correct yourself if you put too much stick input into a particular direction. I stuck about a week solid, which was about 30 hours of sim time whilst I waited for my drone parts to arrive. That, to be honest, is probably above average, but as I mentioned earlier, it was during a pandemic, so not really much else to do. Okay, now you're ready to fly, but you need a drone and some goggles. Let's start with the goggles first. Nowadays, in 2024, we have basically the choice of these 4 goggles from DJI to purchase. I'd say if you're starting, get these on the used market, as you can get them super cheap now, and they will fly with anything apart from the latest 04 Air unit from DJI that they have in the new DJI Avata 2. If you do have a bit more to spend and are not bothered about switching out the antennas on the goggles or having a touchpad, get the Integra goggles like me. That's the ones I have, as they will work with everything, including the DJI Avata 2 and the 04 Air unit. And if you're flash with the cash, then just go ahead and get the latest and greatest goggles 3, as they are currently the top of the line from DJI. Oh, and the 4th pair are the goggles 2, which are better than the goggles Integra, but not as good as the goggles 3. And price-wise sit between the two as well. Setting up your goggles and linking up the DJI's 03 and 04 air units are super simple these days than they were in the past. Basically, just make sure both are updated to the latest firmware. Hold down the on button on the goggles as well as pushing this button on the air unit, and they will bind together. And you'll be able to see what your drone sees through the goggles. Okay, now you have your radio and goggles. You need arguably the most important part, which is the quad. So this is where you need to start searching and researching all the best parts on how to build them together. Well, that's exactly what I did back in 2020. And although it was useful for me to know how the drone was put together and also to learn how to solder, if I could go back, I would have just got myself a ready-to-fly small 1S or 2S drone that would not have been as overwhelming as the powerful 5-inch drone I built to start on. This way you're up in the air flying, getting your confidence up with something that you don't mind crashing about too much. And so when you do finally buy that first expensive 5-inch find and fly quad, you won't be a nervous jittery mess like I was. I'll link a couple of starter drones I recommend you get down in the description. After this, make sure you bind up your receiver to your controller. Next is setting up in Betafly. When it comes to setting up a bind and fly drone in Betafly, they require you to run through the software and do the following to get it ready to fly. So first of all, put your drone on a flat surface and click Calibrate Accelerometer. Then go down to the configuration tab and make sure you put 180 degrees in here, as well as making sure that these two are checked for use of the beeper. Then come down to the receiver tab and make sure you change these values to 1010 and 1990. In the modes tab is where you can set up your switches how you like. To change a switch, just click auto on a particular switch, and then on your radio, press the button on which you want the switch to be. Move the yellow line over the yellow dot so it covers it when the switch is selected, and from then on the switch will now control that action. There's loads of options here, but in my experience the only ones I've ever needed are the arm, pre-arm, angle, beeper and flip over after crash. After this, go down to the motors tab, and with your props off, check this button and go through each motor to make sure the motors are mapped correctly. So that means if you spin number 1, then the bottom right spins, and then the same process for the other 3. Lastly, just come down to the OSD tab to make sure that you have some info showing on your goggles, such as battery voltage level or whether you're in angle or acro. Here you can basically customize it however you like. And it goes without saying, but I will mention it anyway, when you are testing your motors for the first time in the house, then please do not test with your props on. Just don't do it. Very unsafe. There are way more comprehensive videos on Betafly setup, and I'll link a couple down in the description, but for now, this is basically all you need to know to get your bind and fly up in the air. You will also definitely want to install a loud beeper like the ViFly V2, which is amazing because after its initial 1 minute of quietish beeps, it will then start to beep really loud, like very loud, if the quad is not unplugged after that 1 minute, which of course is perfect if you've lost your drone, as the combination of checking the last moments before it crashes in the goggles and listening out for the beeps has allowed me to find my crash quad multiple times, especially when in a large open area. Honestly, a lifesaver, and I can quite confidently say without this I would have lost quite a few quads completely. Now you're probably wondering why I keep banging on about 5-inch drones as some kind of holy grail of drones to fly. Well, essentially a 5-inch quad, 5-inch FPV drone is known to be the sweet spot as a drone that can basically do it all, which means smooth, cinematic, medium range, freestyle and racing. With its power to weight ratio being optimum, especially for freestyle, it's the quad that is most versatile, and most serious FPV pilots have at least one of these in their fleet. When it comes to buying a 5-inch bind and fly these days, there are loads of great ones, unlike when I started, when there was basically just iFly. Now there's also Gep RC, there's Diatone, a host of others. I'm currently using a Gep RC Mark V, and it's absolutely amazing in my opinion, and the one that I'd currently recommend as your first 5-inch. Anyway, all these companies make great stuff now, and the only question you need to decide when you're buying is which receiver you want in yours. The receiver, or RX, is the antenna that connects your drone to your controller. If you took the Mambo or the Tango 2 like I recommended earlier, then you need to choose with the TBS Crossfire, which is the system I've used and that I recommend. The other option is if you want a 6S or a 4S quad. This refers to the power of the batteries and a 6S has 6 cells, making it more powerful than a 4S. I did start off with a 4S 5-inch drone, but I think I would recommend you go straight into 6S, as you will most likely end up with that down the line anyway. So instead of having a load of 4S batteries that you then need to sell on or get rid of, just go straight for 6S, because you will also benefit from the extra power to get you out of troubling scenarios and also longer flight times. For the batteries, definitely don't cheap out, otherwise bad things can happen. I'm still in shock, to be honest, because it went up in like flames. I could see it in my goggles first. Make sure you get reputable brands like these, or even just the batteries that the drone manufacturer recommends. When it comes to charging LiPo batteries, the temptation is to do multi-charging, as individually they can take 30 to 40 minutes each if you're charging them properly. I'd stay away from that, at least in the beginning, and get one of these dual chargers, which safely allows you to charge 2 at a time. Always charge in a LiPo bag and be in the same room as the LiPos whilst charging. For more in-depth LiPo battery charging videos, I've linked them down in the description below, and I recommend you watch them as well. Build or not to build? That is the question. So as I mentioned earlier, I did build straight away because I lacked options at the time, but now with so many amazing buy and fly drones available, I'd recommend saving yourself the hassle of building and tuning and get a ready to fly one, because they're amazing now, to be honest, and much better than what I can build and tune myself. However, I still would take the time to learn how the drones are put together through YouTube tutorials, Joshua Bardwell, and also to learn to solder if you don't know how to, just so you're not overwhelmed by doing any cheap repairs in the future that you will inevitably have to do. Otherwise, the only other alternative would be writing off the whole drone and having to buy another one. So for example, a common issue is damaging a motor. If you at least know that you can buy yourself a $10 motor to swap in, rather than having to buy another $500 buy and fly quad, you're saving yourself a lot of money. Down in the description, I will have links to all the tools I recommend you have in your bag with you for common FPV repairs, as well as the soldering iron I've used for 4 years and is still going strong even now, and also the solder that I recommend you use as well. Also, a pro tip when soldering is to use one of these flux pens with lots of flux on the areas you want to solder, as it helps the solder to run smooth rather than get all dry and sticky. In the beginning, I did not have the first clue about soldering, and to me it looked a bit overwhelming, so I bought these practice boards to start with, and it helped a lot. Oh, and also get yourself one of these whilst you're at it. This is a smoke stopper, and after any soldering work you do, you should plug this in first in between your battery and XT60 plug to check if you did a good job with your soldering or if you potentially have a short. This little thing could potentially save you hundreds as well, so it's worth the few dollars it costs to have in your kit. To use a GoPro or not. For most of my FPV journey, I've used a GoPro on my quad because the onboard camera before the new DJI O3 Air unit was just not good enough for cinematic footage. Now that the O3 Air unit has come out with decine-alike and 10-bit color and is able to stabilize in gyroflow for buttery smooth footage, I'd say if you're starting, save yourself the extra expense of a GoPro and fly with the O3 to learn, as its footage is pretty good now. Definitely more than usable for social media, and also the reduction in weight means your quad will be more fun to fly with longer flight times. The only time I'd say put a GoPro on top is when you feel like you're crashing a lot less after a lot of practice, and if you're doing some work for money, because then you may appreciate the little bit of extra quality out of the GoPro 11 or 12, as well as better dynamic range and low light performance. Oh, and also another recommendation if you are going to look to get a GoPro is to maybe look into getting a GoPro subscription, as they give you 2 free replacements a year if you break yours, which easily happens in FPV, as well as discounted prices on their products. Okay, just before you're about to fly, you want to do some checks. So first of all, an area that has tripped me up many times is not properly checking the prop direction and motor direction. This is easily done here in Betafly, and the props want to be set in the same direction as the motor spinning. Make sure you step back, give yourself a good distance between you and your quad in case it flips out. Definitely do a quick hover test with the goggles off to make sure that everything is okay. As a beginner pilot, I'd recommend setting your camera tilt to about 10 to 15 degrees. The amount of degrees your camera is tilted will dictate how far you need to pitch forward to get the horizon of your drone level, and the more you pitch forward, forward, the more throttle you will naturally add at the same time, which increases the speed of the quad. Therefore, if you want to zip around like a pro FPV racer, you could have a ridiculous angle of 60 degrees and your quad is basically like this the whole time. But for cinematic, most pilots are there between 20 to 30 degrees. And as I mentioned, starting a little bit below that for your first few flights will be the ideal place to start. Definitely start your flying in a wide open area or a big field with soft grass under and no one else around. This is what I did to ensure that crashes will have a better chance of survival and I'm not constantly on the repair table, and also just keeping it safe, no danger around to possibly injure someone. I'd say the two main things you want to focus on first up is your throttle control and also your ability to hover. If you can hover a 5-inch FPV drone in one place comfortably, then you're doing well, as it's not that easy to be honest and takes practice, but it will make you feel like you have good control over your FPV quad. FPV footage from high in general is pointless, I would say, because you want to be getting close to the ground and you want to be getting close to subjects to really enhance that dynamicness of the shots. But to start, practice a little higher up off the ground to give yourself that time to recover whilst you're learning throttle control, and have your finger close to the arm switch in case you feel like you may need to suddenly disarm your quad, which will mean it'll fail safe and drop to the floor safely. And also, I feel like FPV is a big mental hurdle, so a quick word on getting your mind and body under control when flying FPV, because a big part of flying is keeping your nerves and adrenaline under control, and some people are naturally better than this at others, especially if you're already an adrenaline junkie. If like me you're not, then try just taking a second before you take off. Take a few deep breaths to calm your breathing and get as relaxed as possible, because the more relaxed you are, the better split-second decisions you will make. And in FPV, because you're flying so close to things, so close to the ground, those split-second decisions are sometimes where it counts. After that, it's just practice, 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 and look to see if you can meet up with people in your area that you can learn from, as this will push your development along much quicker. And to be honest, it's just much more fun to fly with others than alone.
Yay! I've done it.
Another bit of advice when going out flying in the beginning is, if you do go out and start flying, especially if you're looking to make a day of it with some friends, don't go for your most crazy moves first up. If you have, say, 8 batteries to get through, take at least 1 or 2 to get warmed up and used to your flying environment, get the lay of the land and the weather conditions, and slowly ease into it. On the flip side of that, you can reward yourself for getting through your first 6 batteries unscathed, with the final 2 batteries where you just push yourself out of your comfort zone to achieve possibly a money shot that you've never got before. Absolute mess of shit everywhere. Broken. Oh yeah. This advice obviously does not apply if you're out trying to get a shot and need to nail it on the first battery. That's more of an 8-mile scenario where you just need to be ready and not choke. If you are getting to the point in your FPV journey where you're being approached to do some commercial work with your FPV skills, then make sure you use the right type of quad for the right job, such as any work around people or indoors, you should use a ducted Cinewoop. And for any chasing of vehicles or flying mid-range, more than likely you want to use a 5 or 6 inch unducted quad. And for those long range mountain surfing shots, potentially look into getting a 7-inch unducted quad with bigger batteries and a GPS for those longer flight times and extra added layer of safety. And also, if you are working for money, be professional. Make sure you take along a laptop with you so that you can be checking your shots just like you would do if you're a videographer and you're checking your shots after you've shot them in your camera. Make sure you're checking on a laptop on a proper screen to see if you nailed it in terms of exposure, and also if it stabilizes okay in gyro flow. Okay, cool. So now you're up in the air, let's talk about how you can get the most cinematic footage possible from your FPV drone. Alright, so first of all, we're going to run through some flying tips for better cinematic footage, and then we're going to run through the optimum camera settings as well. And also stick around till the end of the video, as I'll also be giving you some extra bonus post-production tips as well. Sip of coffee first. So there is always that temptation when flying an FPV drone to get a bit twitchy with the sticks, especially when you start watching some freestyle legends. And that's great if you're freestyling. However, always remember that cinematic footage and cinematic FPV is not so much about showing off the skill level of the pilot, the tricks you can do and the maneuvers you can do. It's more about what you're actually filming and having a purpose behind the shot, such as showing off a property, a landscape, or a talent. So therefore, always remember that smooth, gentle, and flowy movements are what's going to please your viewer. So no sharp, erratic turns or flips and rolls, or not too many anyway, as they just cause motion sickness to the regular non-FPV Joe. So a practical tip for this is, if you're starting out, you're probably going to want to adjust your rates to have slower rates for flying smoother, which just means that you have less sensitive sticks, especially in the center of the sticks, and just generally setting a bit of a higher expo will make it less sensitive towards the middle of the sticks, which is usually better for slower and smoother cruising flying, which you will typically do with a Cinewhoop like the DJI Avata. And here are my rates, by the way. If you are curious, you can just pause the screen now. Now, despite what I said in my last point, I do think there are a couple of freestyle moves that you should try and master for cinematic purposes. One of them being the Split S, which is a classic basic freestyle move, but it's a very useful one in cinematic FPV, as if done smoothly, it can be a way to change direction in a more dynamic way than just turning your yaw to turn. It can be a way to dip, dive down and turn.
Dodge, duck, dip, dive and dodge.
And it will allow you to fly, say, over subjects whilst turning in the air to come back the other way, lower to the ground. Something that you'll quite often see in car chases, for example. The next one I think that you should try and master is orbiting, which, you know, simple enough, but obviously again, orbiting in a smooth way that keeps the subject as much as possible in the center of the frame, and again, not too crazy fast. We're trying to keep things slow and cinematic here. And the last one I would say is the good old-fashioned dive, which just looks insane when it's done well. I feel like the dive is that kind of shot that kind of got everyone into FPV, diving down cliffs, Johnny FPV, all that stuff. So definitely one you want to like build yourself up to and get that adrenaline rush. Planning your shot before you take off. This just goes in general for filmmaking, but for drones especially, have some idea of the line that you would like to shoot before you take off. Sometimes I see FPV footage that just looks a bit aimless and doesn't lead to anything. And I've been guilty of that myself. If you have, let's say, a space to show off, try and figure out a line that keeps the attention of the viewer a lot longer and that avoids repeating the same area more than once. And also I feel like with cinematic FPV, it's not about making it jarring with any sudden quick turns. The best shots are often flowy, so knowing your line beforehand can help with this. If I'm not able to see the space that I'm flying in well enough beforehand, or if there's no time to decide the line, then normally what I'll do is just take off and maybe do a slow exploration flight first with no risk involved, just to get an idea and also get, you know, warmed up. Because no matter what happens, no matter how experienced you are, always when you take off to start your first flight, you do need to get a little bit warmed up and, you know, get your adrenaline under control. With the DJI Avata battery life, I find that it's easier to do this, as, you know, you can use maybe 25 or 30% of one battery to do, let's say, an exploration recce, stay in the air and get started with your actual flight. Whereas with my other FPV drones or FPV Cinewhoops, it would more likely be like a full battery, have to come back, reset, and then start my main flight. Have a subject to focus on. Having a subject to focus on, it doesn't have to mean you need a person in the shot, but definitely something that the shot is trying to show off, or a point of interest for the shot, let's say. Like for instance, a particular building you're trying to show off, or a particular part of nature like a waterfall, or something that the shot is leading up to reveal. I think that's the great thing about FPV, to be honest, is that you can actually go from a completely different area and through a different space to reveal your subject, which just adds to the anticipation of the viewer. And this is really harnessing the power of these drones more than any other type of filmmaking gear. Sorry, I think I just went off on a bit of a tangent there, but I think you're getting what I'm trying to say.
Sometimes I'll start a sentence and I don't even know where it's going. I just hope I find it along the way.
Other tips that I'd suggest for cinematic footage are, if you have a choice, try and get your flights at the best lighting times of the day, such as golden hour, to really give it that cinematic feel with the lighting. And also look for leading lines. So for example, if you're out in the mountains, then look for those gaps in the mountains or those ridges, and maybe flying across the line of a ridge. Things like that. Potentially looking for other symmetrical areas, such as if you're in a forest, flying through the middle of trees. Now let's talk about camera settings. Firstly, exposure. So here is a quick breakdown. Personally, I try and use manual settings as much as I can by locking my ISO to 100, which is the minimum. And I'll normally have my shutter at 1/100 for that nice consistent motion blur. And then with those settings, if you're flying outdoors, naturally you're going to be very overexposed. So to correct that, you just add an ND filter, an ND8, 16, or even a 32 for those crazy bright days. Just allows you to get that more realistic motion blur that, you know, our eyes are used to, and that just adds to that cinematic look, in my opinion. Now, as a rule of thumb in the world of videography, to get that cinematic look that we're used to seeing in, say, Netflix type films, you want to be trying to look after the highlights as much as possible. Generally speaking, sometimes the highlights are blown out on purpose, that's more of a style, but generally speaking, you want to try and look after them. But that's, you know, not to the expense of having the shadows too dark, which in some scenarios with smaller sensor cameras, action cameras, you know, the O3 air unit, it's quite tricky to do, to find that balance. But what I will say is, generally it's easier in post-production anyway to bring up the shadows than it is to rescue the highlights after they've clipped. So I'd say generally try and expose a little bit darker, you know, on a brighter day than you normally would, and you should be able to fix that in post by rescuing the shadows. And therefore, you know, if you look after the highlights, like I said, as much as you can with an action cam or an O3 air unit, then your footage should be looking good after all, especially after you've done a color correction and any grading. Now that's mainly for outdoor settings when the light is pretty consistent. But however, if I'm doing any sort of flight where I may be indoors for a bit and then head on outdoors, like some kind of real estate shooting, I've tended to use auto shutter settings in those scenarios, whilst having the meter set to 0 for exposure and giving a bit more wiggle room to the ISO to the max of 400 for the darker areas. And therefore, even if there is a tiny little bit of noise, maybe in the shadowy areas in post, that's pretty fixable with some denoiser. And it just allows me to make sure that, you know, I'm getting as balanced an image from the outdoors to the indoors as possible. Film as flat as possible, which for the DJI Avata is decent-alike for more flexibility with grading in post. And also try and keep the in-camera sharpening down to the minimum, or maximum keep it at 0, depending on your taste. Use a higher frame rate, 50/60 frames per second, with a shutter of 1/100 or 1/120. Now this has two benefits, as to be honest, you shouldn't really be flying with anything lower than 50 frames per second, as it will just look quite weird and jarring in your goggles. But the second advantage of this is it will also allow you to add slow motion to particular parts of your footage where you may need it as part of the story. The nature of FPV footage is that it can be a bit too fast in some scenarios, and speeding up and slowing down is something that we should be able to do when we need to, but it's actually sometimes a lot easier to just film at a higher frame rate and then slow down or speed up particular parts in post, especially if you're not sure beforehand which parts you want to be sped up or slowed down. White balance. This is something I look to lock in whenever I can to avoid changes in color that will make color grading in post harder. And if you're unsure how to set your white balance, then here's a chart with some guidance on what white balance you should use if you are unsure. The only exception to this rule, and where I may use auto white balance, is if the shot is going through spaces with different color temperatures, such as a house tour that has tungsten lighting inside and then obviously daylight outside. That is a situation where I'd use auto white balance to make sure it changes for the correct white balance when I'm outside or inside. All right, so true to my words, some bonus post-production tips. Number one, stabilizing in post. So if you are new to FPV and let's say the DJI Avata is your first drone, you might not know this, but you actually want to be turning off the stabilization in the camera. And also, whilst you're there in the goggles, set your field of view to wide. If you do this, you'll be able to record the gyro data as a separate file to the SD card. And then you can run it through a software called GyroFlow, which is completely free. And it's just absolutely amazing for stabilizing your footage to a very, very high standard professional level. You might be asking, is the Rocksteady built into the DJI Avata good enough? And yeah, it sort of is okay, but definitely you will see the difference if you did them side by side. Stabilizing in post is much better in my opinion, especially for those tricky flying scenarios where you might have some prop wash, some wind involved that really shakes up your drone. GyroFlow can just rescue those moments, whereas most of the time Rocksteady or Hypersmooth in GoPro won't be able to do that. The only sort of downside to using GyroFlow and stabilizing post is it does crop in a little bit, but me personally, I've never minded losing a little bit of resolution for that extra cinematic smoothness. Color grading. Now, as I mentioned before, filming as flat as possible. So for example, with the Avata, Decine will give you more room to do any kind of color correction and grading in post. There are many LUT packs out there for cameras like the GoPro or for the O3 DJI Air unit, and they all do a great job. But if you didn't want to use those, you can quite simply add a quick and simple color correction to your videos like this. And then you can also apply a grading style by playing around with these sliders down here. Speed ramping. Believe me, this is not always necessary, and quite often it's very overdone. I myself have been guilty of overdoing this in the past. But I do believe there are some scenarios where speed ramping your FPV footage can enhance the viewer experience. Speed ramping parts of your clips can help skip the parts that are less interesting to get to the more interesting parts. And the last one is adding sound effects. This is a whole video in itself, which I have made and I'm going to link down in the description, but I just wanted to mention it as sound when it comes to video production is half of the experience. So while sticking music under the footage is a quick and dirty option, taking the time to add those immersive sound effects as well, such as whooshes when flying past something, or some Foley sound effects of bikes if you're filming bikes, for example, forest sounds if you're filming in a forest. These sound effects can really heighten that cinematic experience. But word of warning, make sure you keep the sounds subtle and not too obvious. The sounds that you add need to make sense and be there to heighten the experience, not so loud that they become jarring and actually take your viewer out of the video and make them actually notice the sound effects. They need to be subtle. So DJI provide a great ready-to-go drone for beginners with their Avata line of drones, but is it the right one to purchase as your first FPV drone? In this next section, we'll run through the pros and cons of the DJI Avata line of drones versus the traditional bind and fly FPV drones to help you make a decision on what you should get first. And yes, I am fully aware that this video is pretty pointless if you have the budget to buy both. However, if you are just looking to dip your toes into this hobby, or if you only have the budget for one of them, then carry on watching. And the last thing that I want to mention before we begin is that as of last month, the brand new O4 Air unit came out, which basically meant that the camera system in all the bind and fly Cinewhoops and bind and fly drones going forward will be the same as the DJI Avata 2. Previously, the DJI Avata 2 had the O4 and the bind and flies had the O3, so it had a superior camera quality. So this comparison was a bit harder, but like I said, as of last month, the camera quality is identical. So it's not something that I will be mentioning in this review as a comparison between the both of them. So what are the main reasons you should get yourself a DJI Avata 2 as a brand new FPV pilot? Number one, the first pro for getting an Avata 2 over a bind and fly FPV Cinewhoop is the sports mode and normal mode, which are the non-acro modes on this drone. Similar to flying a Mavic drone, let's say, but through your goggles. And this can have the advantage of if you're a newbie or getting used to flying with goggles on, which is a completely different experience to flying line of sight. You can do this with the DJI Avata 2 to start, with the safety of having the sensors to help you and being able to hover in place easily. Ultimately, your goal with this will be to fly manual mode with the goggles on, but in the beginning, just to get used to flying in normal mode or sports mode with the goggles on is a great way to start, which you will not be able to do with bind and fly Cinewhoops. They do have something similar in a normal FPV Cinewhoop, which is something called angle mode, but it's not as precise as normal mode on the Avata, and I'd always recommend to try to get into manual or acro mode as quick as possible, but just for those initial first flights, whilst you get used to the goggles, this can be helpful. Number 2, the emergency stop and return to home on the DJI Avata. The Avata 2 has an emergency stop button, which again for beginners is great to have that peace of mind. If you're flying in manual mode and you lose control or you're about to crash, you can just press that button and it will stop very, very quickly and hover in place back into normal mode, just so you can catch your breath back before you start again. The Avata 2 has also a return to home similar to a Mavic drone, which means if you press that, it will use a GPS to come back to your takeoff position. And also if you lose signal, flick itself into return to home and fly back to you. These days, it is also possible to put GPS into a bind and fly Cinewhoop, but it's something that you need to go into Betaflight to configure. And this brings me to point number 3, which is you don't actually need any knowledge of software such as Betaflight to make adjustments to the DJI Avata 2. All the settings can be accessed through the goggles. Number 4, battery life. So the battery life of the DJI Avata 2 is far superior to the LiPo batteries you'll use with your bind and fly quads, probably by at least double, in some cases more. But this does come at a literal cost of being about $80 more than your standard LiPo battery. The batteries of the DJI Avata 2 are far better in every way. They're built better, they're built to last compared to a FPV LiPo. So it is worth the investment, and also as it is a high capacity battery, you won't need to carry as many of them, and not to mention the charging of them being smarter and more simple than charging FPV LiPo batteries. Number 5, being able to change the tilt of the camera whilst in the air. When flying FPV, the tilt of your camera measured in degrees dictates how much you need to pitch forward and therefore how much throttle you need to add to keep the horizon level. All that to basically say the higher the tilt in degrees, the faster you'll be flying. With the DJI Avata 2, you will have the ability to change this whilst you're in the air flying, which is pretty game changing for FPV. It was when the first DJI FPV came out, whereas on a regular FPV drone, this has to be predetermined before you take off. You have to manually get the tilt angle the way you want it, and it can only be adjusted by landing and adjusting it manually and then taking off again. Number 6, being able to hover in place without touching the sticks. If you're a beginner or coming from Mavic drones, this might seem like nothing special, but with a regular FPV Cinewhoop, hovering in one place actually takes some practice and means you need to be on the sticks to do it. With the DJI Avata 2, you can start up in normal mode, have it ready in the air, and then flick it into manual mode when you're ready to start flying FPV. Now, the reasons you should get a non-DJI bind and fly over a DJI Avata 2. Number 1, the DJI radio controller is very basic, to put it nicely. This might not seem like a big deal, but if you have flown both a DJI radio controller and a non-DJI one, then you will notice how much nicer the gimbals are on the non-DJI radios and how they allow for much smoother and precise controls, especially when you are flying slower and trying to avoid that annoying up and down throttle bounce. Number 2, durability. The DJI Avata first version came out and it was massively durable. It was pretty hard to break that thing. However, the DJI Avata 2 has definitely sacrificed some of that beefiness in the duck, possibly to help reduce the noise level and make it overall lighter for a better flying performance, which is a fair trade-off, as I think most people would take better flying characteristics over durability, especially for a non-freestyle drone like the Avata 2. However, if you are a beginner looking to get into FPV, then you should be aware of this, and even a mid-level kind of crash on the DJI Avata 2 over most bind and fly Cinewhoops will lead to some kind of damage to the frame, which was previously not the case with the Avata 1, and it will mean you most certainly will need to have DJI Care Refresh if you're a beginner attempting to fly manual mode with this drone. Most other bind and fly Cinewhoops in the 3 to 3.5 inch category are built much better with more crash resisting materials such as carbon fiber frames and TPU ducts. This leads me on to the next advantage of a bind and fly Cinewhoop, which are that obtaining cheap spare parts and fixing yourself is a lot easier than fixing anything with the DJI Avata 2, which looks like it's virtually impossible to do any work on. Before FPV became very mainstream, this was actually the norm for pilots to pick up a couple of spare motors or a spare frame just in case of damaging a crash, that within 1 hour you can be repaired and back up in the air again. This of course is very useful if you're learning to fly manual mode and crashing a fair bit. The same cannot be said for the DJI Avata 2, which will need to be sent into DJI for repairs and then sent back out, which could well mean you'll be out of action for 1 week plus. Number 4. So as I mentioned before, angle mode is sort of like the equivalent of normal mode on the DJI Avata 2. So it's not full manual, but it does keep the horizon level and easier to hover than in acro. Not many FPV pilots recommend flying angle mode at all, but there are some instances where it is useful. If you are looking to buy a ducted FPV drone like an Avata 2 or a bind and fly Cinewhoop, chances are you want to do some kind of flying indoors in smaller, tighter spaces. Flying your bind and fly drone in angle mode can actually be really good for this, and it keeps the horizon level and allows you to fly slower indoors without getting as much throttle bounce as you might get flying in acro mode. Of course, if you are a seasoned pilot with a lot of experience flying, then this won't be an issue even in acro mode, as you already know how to eradicate that throttle bounce through tuning your quad and lots and lots of practice. However, until that point, angle mode can be very useful to do any sort of slow flying indoors, similar to normal mode on the DJI Avata drones. So the point is, what happens if you want to go from angle mode to acro mode in the same shot, in the same flight? For example, you might do some very slow flying in tight indoor spaces, around some talent or through some very tiny tight gaps, but then you want to go outside and the shot calls for you to do some acro, rip around a little bit outside in more space. This is the advantage of having a bind and fly Cinewhoop, as this can be done whilst in the middle of your one take shot with a quick flick of a switch. Whereas if you want to go from normal mode to manual mode on the DJI Avata 2, you need to flick a switch and then hover, line up those little dots to flick it into manual mode, basically making it impossible to go from normal to manual mode whilst carrying on the shot. Numero 5. DJI drones, including the DJI Avata 2, come with geofencing and other software restrictions such as altitude limits and no-fly zones. You don't have the same issues with bind and fly FPV drones, and they do not impose the same restrictions, giving you more freedom to fly, although you must still follow the regulations and guidelines. Number 6 is flight performance. Now, I wasn't sure if I should put this in as a reason to buy a bind and fly Cinewhoop over the DJI Avata 2, because if you're beginning your FPV journey, you won't notice the difference in flying performance between the two, but it is worth noticing that if you are looking to do this long term, then most bind and fly quads from reputable companies such as iFly, GapRC and loads of others will fly better and smoother than the DJI Avata 2, as the tuning on bind and fly drones these days are really great and very precise to that particular quad. Couple of inches either side with an FPV drone is a bit of a challenge for me. On the last try. I especially noticed this in windier or even breezy conditions where FPV Cinewhoops traditionally do struggle anyway because of the ducts, but the DJI Avata 2 is especially bad. Overall, these better flying characteristics will also allow for some more complicated maneuvers, which the DJI Avata drones have notoriously struggled with. So in this next section, I'm going to explain the best tips I've learned on how you can fly your FPV drone through small gaps, and how you can also get awesome dynamic shots of moving vehicles as well, so you can become the next Johnny FPV maybe. So if you're at that stage where you're feeling fairly comfortable flying your DJI Avata 2 drone in manual mode, you will probably be wanting to start attempting to hit some gaps. The feeling of hitting tiny gaps, especially a few in a row, is like no other, and the visuals produced from mastering this skill are what could potentially take your videos from a few views from your grandparents and your neighbor to going viral on social media. The issue is with hitting small gaps with your Avata 2 is that it can be quite daunting, especially if you crash initially doing it and potentially have to take your drone to get fixed or use your DJI Care Refresh. But fear not, I've been in this position of regularly failing to hit small gaps with my FPV drones in the past, and have some game-changing tips that will take you from tiny gap hesitation to relishing any opportunity you can to hit one. In the beginning, when trying to hit small gaps, I would very often either get close and back out of it at the last second as I felt like I wasn't aligning properly or about to hit some part around the gap and crash. I did this for a while with not that much improvement until one day I got some incredible advice that changed my whole mentality and approach to handling those small gaps. And this is the first tip, which is to look through the gap that you want to go through. Essentially what this means is making sure you're focusing on the bit after the gap rather than the actual gap itself. It's a small mindset shift, but that was all it took for me to really start feeling comfortable going through gaps. It's difficult to explain, but essentially I felt like it was creating a synergy between my eyes and my fingers on the sticks, and if I focused on the area part through the gap with my eyes, then the fingers adjusted naturally to take me through. If you are focusing on the actual gaps itself, there's more chance your fingers will follow your eyes and you'll struggle to go through and eventually hit the bit around the gap or click it on the way through. Like I said, it's a tough one to explain, but try it out. I'm sure you will see an improvement. Number 2 is to get your expo right. Expo is important and is quite often overlooked by new avata pilots. If you increase this, then you will be able to fly smoother through gaps, as tiny movements around the middle of the sticks won't influence the direction of the drone too much, and you'll be able to negate the up and down bobble that you can quite often get, especially when you're flying slower. If you're feeling like you're too twitchy, you'll overcorrect and be more likely to crash into the area around the gap. Number 3, as I mentioned in the intro, some of the best videos you will see online are ones where the pilot finds a line with many gaps in a row. So tip number 3 is to always be prepared for the next gap. This means once you're through, don't celebrate and don't think about how cool that was. Quickly adjust for the next one and the next one after that. And then after your flight, sit back, take a look and enjoy the amazing gaps that you just hit in a row. The simulator can be great for practicing gaps in the beginning, and I definitely recommend it, but the problem with the simulator, as far as I'm aware, is you only have ideal conditions, meaning no wind, and in reality there will always be a bit of wind that can affect the direction, especially if you're going from outdoors to indoors. So my advice here is to not approach gaps too slowly. It was definitely a mistake that I made in the beginning, which was to think that if I approach the gap slowly and try and go through slower, then if I do crash, the crash won't be too bad, and maybe my drone actually will survive. However, this always caused me to get blown around as I was approaching the gap due to having less authority in the air. And when you are trying to hit a precise gap, this is not what you want. Plus, it never actually looks as good if you go through a gap slower with an FPV drone. So fly a little faster than you feel comfortable so that you're able to have authority in the air and not have to battle the breeze. And more often than not, you'll fly through smoother and more impressively. A practical tip for this is to make sure you have a camera angle of at least 5 degrees if you're flying indoors to have that forward momentum, and possibly 10 to 25 degrees if you're flying outside, depending on how fast you want to go and how much wind you are trying to battle against. Next, if you do have the Avata 2, then of course you do have the luxury of having normal and sport modes, which is not full manual mode. Therefore, the temptation is there to go through these gaps in those beginner modes before you try full manual mode. However, my advice would be to go straight into flying through gaps in full manual mode once you're comfortable flying in full manual mode, rather than going back a step and trying out the other modes to go through gaps such as normal and sport mode. Those modes, they hover your drone for you, so your throttle control doesn't need to be that precise. However, when you're in manual mode, which is a mode you want to be flying most of the time with an FPV drone, most of the art of hitting a gap is through having your throttle control dialed in, so it will feel completely different from going from normal or sport mode to manual mode when you do eventually switch. Next tip. So sometimes you go out and you want to just get flying. You've been sitting indoors all day, stuck at the office, front of the computer, whatever, and you just want to get out there ASAP, get your drone up in the air and start hitting some gaps. I get you on that one, trust me. However, my next tip for you is to hold your horses, take a little bit of time, plan ahead, and go for a little recce of the area first, especially if it's a newer area that you've not flown in before. Firstly, to make sure it's safe with no people hiding on the other side of potential gaps that you want to go through. And secondly, so that you can have more of an idea of the line you want to try and create, making a really cool flight video where you're hitting some gaps in a row that makes a pleasant cinematic flight rather than a jerky, I'm not sure where I'm going type of flight, because you're trying to come up with a line whilst you're in the air. This will have the advantage of actually making you more focused as well when you're flying, as you have a clear beginning and end point, and you're short of the gaps you want to hit in between. I've spent a lot of time watching videos on socials of pilots hitting tiny gaps, and they make it look easy. So my first instinct when I go out is to look for those same sort of small gaps straight away. And a lot of the time, especially when I first started out, I struggle and crash pretty early on. So my next tip is to build up to those smaller gaps. Maybe use a few minutes of your battery or even a whole battery to feel comfortable going through some larger gaps, or just generally flying in the area. Calm your adrenaline down and get used to the flight conditions, and start to attempt the smaller gaps when you're confidently hitting the larger ones. Next tip, take a deep breath before you start flying to let oxygen into your brain, and to also keep breathing as you're flying. I know that sounds really obvious, because without it, you know, you can end up in hospital. But what I mean is, you can be so focused sometimes on the flight and the gaps that you actually do forget to breathe and take air in to get air into your brain, and this can actually mess up your flight, as breathing means your body is more calm and relaxed, and that will translate over to your flying and into your fingers on the sticks. Next, when you're flying through a gap, line yourself up, stay steady, and commit. Hesitation for me always equals collision. If you're second guessing, you'll clip something or hit something. Trust your setup, trust your instincts, no hesitation, and just go through the gaps. So last week I had the opportunity to film some trucks with my FPV drone as part of a promo video I was shooting. So I just wanted to share a few tips and tricks that I've learned along the way when it comes to getting cinematic shots of vehicles with an FPV drone. So I chose to use my DJI Avata 2, even though I had other options, as I was filming some brand new vans and trucks for this shoot. So I just wanted that extra safety of prop guards, plus the extra camera quality of the 04 Air unit, and having D-Log-M for flexibility of color grading in post. Also, being able to hover whilst talking to the driver on the phone was a big plus, and not to mention the battery life, allowing me to get all the shots I needed without having to bring the drone back to swap batteries like I would normally do with a classic FPV drone. Had it been a windy day, I might have used my unducted drones, but thankfully it wasn't. So the DJI Avata 2 was a pretty perfect drone for filming these vehicles that were traveling at no more than 30 miles an hour because of the speed limit restriction. All right, so let's talk about before you fly, safety and setup. So we had a private road to fly in with lots of wide open space, which was great. So I could focus mainly on the trucks rather than having to worry about obstacles in my periphery. Also, there was no people around so that I could fly low to the ground. I definitely would advise that these types of shoots are done on private roads with permission for drone filming, or at the very least, very, very quiet roads. Next tip is to coordinate with the driver. Before shooting, I spoke with the driver to just let him know which route I preferred him to take. And also, he let me know that there was a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. So that gave me an idea of how fast I would be able to go. And therefore I had my camera angle at 25 degrees for a medium-ish speed. I also took his number so I could have him on speakerphone in case I needed to communicate anything to him whilst he was driving. So ideal camera settings for chase shots. I was filming in manual mode, full acro mode. If you're comfortable doing that, otherwise you could use sports mode as well. The camera tilt will dictate how fast you will go, as I mentioned earlier, and as I said earlier, for this I was shooting at 25 degrees. The shutter speed I had at double my frame rate, so I was at 50 frames per second, so I had my shutter at 1/100 with an ND8 and the ISO at the minimum of 100, and I also had the white balance at 6000 Kelvin. As I mentioned earlier as well, I was using D-Log-M for color grading, flexibility and editing, and I also stabilized the footage in post-production using gyroflow, so I had the stabilization turned off in camera and set the field of view to wide with a 4:3 aspect ratio for the best possible stabilization results. Flight tips. So I wanted to get a good variety of shots whilst I was filming so that things didn't get too repetitive. So here are a few types of shots that I got. Number one, the classic chase from behind, which is a good one to start to warm up, as it's the easiest and safest, as you can just adjust your speed based on the speed of the vehicle in front of you. As I mentioned earlier, these were brand new vehicles, so I didn't want to get too close. So I maintained a little bit of a cushion for reaction time. So another shot I did was get ahead of the truck and fly towards it and over it, as well as following from the side and passing in front and around, doing a full cinematic arc and trying to adjust the yaw and pitch on my controls in a way that keeps the truck in the center as much as possible. I also used surrounding trees to fly past to reveal the truck as an extra interesting visual element. Another trick you could try is asking the driver to reverse, and then you can fly forwards as they reverse, so that when you reverse the shot in editing, it looks like you were flying backwards and over the vehicle while they are flying forwards. And I actually use this to my advantage to create a cool transition in the final video. Getting low to the ground when you approach can also make the shot seem faster and more dynamic, so that the ground proximity gives you that kind of speed illusion. So also a few quick tips for post-production. So always make sure you review your goggle footage to make sure the exposure is correct and your subject is in the middle of the shot, as I mentioned before. You could also consider adding motion blur in post for a more cinematic feel if you were not able to use ND filters, or if there was not enough motion blur to your liking. I use RSMB and it works great. Also, as I mentioned before, using D-Log M so that you can color grade your footage in post and get the kind of look that you want. So a few mistakes that you want to try and avoid is flying too close or too fast too soon. Also not syncing with the driver's actions, and also try not to fly too jerky and overcorrect your movements, as this can also be quite destabilizing for the people that are watching the footage. And the last thing I want to mention is I did use the DJI Avata 2, which I have mentioned in the past in other videos, is that it doesn't fly very well in wind. There was no windy conditions in this shoot, so I was able to use it and it worked really, really well for me. I wouldn't advise it if it was a windier day. I would probably advise you to use an unducted drone, as you'll probably have more control. Obviously, it might mean that you won't be able to get as close, but having more control over your drone is better, especially when you're going to be filming moving subjects. So you may also be considering Freestyle FPV as something you want to do, as well as Cinematic FPV. If that's something you want to get into as well, this next section has some great tips on how you can become a great Freestyle FPV pilot as well. Ever wondered how Freestyle FPV pilots are able to create these insane tricks whilst you're sitting there barely able to keep your quad in the air? As someone who is a cinematic pilot but dabbled in trying to learn a bit of freestyle, let me tell you, it's hard. So how do they do it? Many hours of practice? Well, yeah, but there's definitely more to it than that. And today I'm going to be chatting to a UK freestyle FPV legend in order to pick his brain and find out how he was able to become so good so fast and rack up millions of views on his videos.
I always say this, luck doesn't exist. It's all about probability, and figure out where you cannot fly. And that's where you want to fly.
So stay tuned if you're someone who wants to get into freestyle FPV, as you won't want to miss these game-changing insights. So how important do you think it is practicing on a simulator versus just like getting out into a bando and practicing in real life?
Right. So I think is definitely very important. I know some people prefer to just go out and fly, but I think if you want to get very good and quicker and without spending a lot of money and breaking a lot of drone.
Drone came apart, got the battery, GoPro's broken, this new Apex frame is destroyed.
More than necessary, I mean,
Yeah.
because you want to break it anyway. You definitely need to practice a lot. I practice 1,000 of hours, I guess.
1,000 hours?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's been 5 years, so now I'm not flying so much, but I think first year I was already at 1,000,
Wow.
something like that. I don't remember very well, but a lot of hours. First month I remember that I was flying a simulator at least an hour a day.
Wow, okay.
And then I start to fly for real, because I was waiting for parts, I was saving money first, because I really wanted to buy it.
So
But
you were kind of forced into like
yes,
practicing simulator.
yeah.
Okay.
I first bought the controller,
Uh-huh.
and then for a month basically I just flew there, because I didn't even have a drone.
Right, okay.
And then when the drone arrived, I was ready basically.
Nice.
I could already like power loop and things.
Wow, okay. Because that was like the complete opposite for me. I did kind of the minimum in the simulator, because my goal in the beginning was just cinematic flying. I just wanted to be able to fly straight, do a little bit of banking to the side and go through some gaps. So once I got to that stage, I didn't really enjoy the simulator because it was like getting me headaches and stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just wanted to get straight out and flying. But then I noticed that I struggled flying straight away out in the real world, whereas versus you said you felt completely comfortable because the amount of time you put in, and then you could also do lots of freestyle straight away.
Yeah.
So
yeah, basics, but still I could do something, you know.
So yeah, would you advise new freestyle pilots to start like coming to a bando and bando bashing straight away or not?
Right. Well, not straight away for sure. I will wait a bit. At least that you know how to fly around, how to land. That's very important. We didn't touch on that, but yeah. Once you know though, I think you should push yourself and try a bit. Because it's important, I think, that you put yourself in those uncomfortable situations. Those are the situations that teach you most of the freestyle and how to deal with obstacles and problems in general.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely as soon as possible, I would say.
And I think you can make yourself feel like much better having come to a bando, and even if it's like your first few times hitting a small gap with a trick or something like that,
Yeah.
you can just take that away and be like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Like mentally, I think it's quite a big one, because otherwise you can come here, you can make a bando whatever you want. Like he comes here and he absolutely just rips it for what it, like. No matter what it is. Whereas I sometimes come here and I just cruise around and say I've been at a bando, but it's all about how far you want to push yourself as well at the end of the day. So if you do want to come here, cruise around in the beginning, but then say to yourself, at least let me try and power loop through a gap in the roof by the end of this, and you manage to do it, it gives you such a lift.
Yeah.
On the flip side, you might mess it up, you might end up breaking your drone. And that can also be quite a downward feeling that might make you want to feel like you want to give up. But nothing beats the feeling of like actually coming here with a goal, with an idea of a trick, and you actually achieve it. You go away thinking like, right, okay, maybe I can actually be good at freestyle. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like if you
Yeah.
like
True,
rabbit. Yeah.
true.
Would you recommend these days starting with a 5-inch drone that's made for freestyle straight away, or something else?
Definitely depends on what you want to do with it, cinematic, freestyle. But let's say in general, I think it's worth it to start with a 3-inch.
Right.
With all these DJI new goggles and VTX, you can fly a 3-inch, have the quality of a GoPro almost, basically.
Yeah.
That wasn't the case when I started. So that's great. And a 3-inch is lighter. You can fly it basically everywhere. You might still have the same power ratio of a 5-inch or similar. You have to find a good one that doesn't break very easily. But even if it breaks, usually it's cheaper to repair.
Right.
Smaller motors, smaller frame, everything.
I guess there's more chance of you being able to have like a couple of them as well.
Exactly. That's a very good point. So you don't have to stop flying if your drone broke. That's a very good point, because a lot of times I had to go back home and I couldn't actually fly.
Yeah.
If you have 2 of them,
This is one of the things, is like not part of the question, but one of the things that I found really fascinating flying with you is a lot of the time you would literally just come with one drone and get some amazing footage, not crash it, like still risk it. Like you risk it a lot, much more than me. I think it's because you were so dialed in and precise in the simulator that like it helped you a lot. Whereas I might have 2 or 3 drones, mess them all up within the first few batteries and have nothing to fly. So what was the drone that you started on?
So I started with it was called a Larva X.
Right.
It was like a 2.5-inch actually. I think I was flying on 3S.
Did you find it like powerful in the beginning when you?
That little drone has a great power ratio, so it's very light and it's very fast.
Right.
So I was doing like all the trick, well, not all, but I was doing like power loop, everything. I was doing inverted yaw spin. I remember some people was thinking like, how can you do that with such a light drone?
Yeah.
Because you need a bit of momentum going on, right?
Yeah.
It was so fast, so you will just like throw it in the air. So it's good, and it's similar in a certain way to the 5-inch.
Okay.
So going to the 5-inch wasn't that different. So I advise something like that.
New era. Here we go. New era. Yeah.
So who were the pilots that inspired you to get into FPV?
All right, well, a few for sure. Well, Mr. Steele, the first one, probably the first person I've ever seen flying a drone, like a lot of people, I guess. Then Ledrib, 100%. Love this flow and the vibe he was giving in the flight. That was very artistic for me. And then after a while, I had the opportunity to meet with Sync FPV,
Yeah,
Tom.
he's like one of the best in the
yeah.
UK, I think. Yeah.
He was very nice as well with me, gave me my first 3D printed mount for the GoPro with that pink.
Yeah.
It was very nice. So all the combination, of course, it was a great pilot. Plus, it was nice.
Yeah.
We went out to fly a few times, so it was great. He quickly became one of my favorite pilots.
And then he gave you advice about the rates as well.
He also gave me advice about race. He's been very nice. He helped me get better at it.
Cool.
Show me the Crack Palace. Yeah, it was great. So yeah.
New era. Here we go. New era. Yeah.
How important do you think it is to like start building straight away a
Right.
quad for freestyle?
So I think it's very important and definitely advise it. But if you don't build your very first drone, I don't think it's the end of the world. I didn't. I started with a 3-inch pre-build. I soon broke it and learned to build by repairing.
Right.
Usually people learn to build so they can then repair it. I did the opposite and was a bit easier for me because I had just to resolder something instead of do the full build.
Right.
But then when I started with the 5-inch, I built it myself.
Okay.
And it's extremely important because you're going to break it and you have to fix it. And if you want to do a lot of freestyle, probably you will fix it on the field. So, it's not a nice table with all your tools and everything. You have to be quite good at it, or good enough at least.
Yeah. Let's go.
Do you plan your lines before you start and try and hit the same line over and over again till you get it? Or do you just fly randomly and hope that you'll pick up a good line along the way?
Right. Me personally, I fly what I call more like a reaction freestyle.
Right.
So I don't plan the line. I just go out with a feeling. Of course, before I fly, as always, you go around the bando. So you see like there are some obstacles, some dangers that you want to avoid, some water, some pond or something.
Oh, yeah.
And you might see something and think, oh, there might be a good dive there or a good matty flip there. And at a certain point, if I feel like it and I'm there, I will know that that was a good spot for it and will probably attempt it. But yeah, I don't have a line. I just don't enjoy repeating the same thing over and over again.
But some people do that, right?
Yeah, of course. They will find a line and be like battery after battery until they're finished, and then they get the best result. And what you see usually called that line style. Right, and nothing wrong. It's just not very fun for me. I prefer like to fly more as a reaction. I really like Mr. Steel. Older days there was Mr. Steel going very strong, and I think like he always flew like a reaction more than a line.
Right.
So yeah, I do that.
Right. Okay.
New era. Here we go. New era. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the trick that took you the longest to learn and master?
Right. That's a difficult question because there are tricks that I'm still have to master, I guess. And even this one probably is not mastered. I will go with the matty flip for the moment because it's kind of...
It's hard.
Yeah, it's one of the hardest if you think about it. All the tricks that you're flying backwards anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was harder as well because of how badly you crash.
Yeah.
Because you are upside down, and at the beginning you might find yourself pushing against the floor.
And they go straight.
Yeah,
Oh,
especially in like situation like a bando. Otherwise, the trip is spin, and I think that on simulator I find it very easy. Of course, simulator is a bit easier, but the real difficulty for me for the trippy spin is one, the camera angle. I fly 25 and I flew 20 for the majority of the time.
Okay.
And you need like, yeah, you can do 25, but you need something very tall. So if I find something tall, I can do it very easy, but I never find something tall.
Your camera angle is an interesting point as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's something you said you fly 25 degrees, right?
Yeah, now, yeah.
But there's some people that fly like 40, right? Yeah. Some people that helps for certain tricks.
Yes, definitely. There are different kind of style as well. that prefer a different kind of angle.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have like a juicy style, usually is 20 or lower, like 15
Right.
even. Then you go more acro, I think 25 is quite popular.
Right.
And then if you want to go up, I think they call it like mind-bending style, something like that. It's more about like trippy spin and stuff like that.
Right.
Then a very high angle, like 30, 40, 45 even. And if you want to race, then you go
Yeah.
even high, like 45, even 70 if you want, right? Depends of racer, I guess.
Yeah.
The different advantages.
So what would be like the one move for newbie freestyle pilots that you would recommend them try to practice into the ground, master first?
Well, the first one that comes in my mind, of course, is the power loop.
Right. Okay.
It's probably the easiest one to learn.
Uh-huh.
But another one I think is very good to learn, maybe straight after it, is the juicy flick.
Right. Okay.
I've abused that trick a lot, especially at the beginning. It's like a very handy way to just turn around.
Right. Okay.
So
But
you-
make it look.
Yeah, make it look
Cool.
real nice. So you juicy flick, and now you're facing the opposite way, and you can turn around basically in that way.
So how do you do, like, if you just had to give a quick example, what
So,
is a juicy flick in
The
terms of?
juicy flick, well, we could go like very technical. You actually might want to watch up for a second and then do it, but just like simplify it. You just flick the drone forward.
Forward. Okay.
So now you're watching backwards, but upside down.
Off the throttle.
Yeah,
Right.
off the throttle. So a blimp of throttle, then off the throttle straight away, otherwise you're gonna push down. And then you just roll 180, and then now you're gonna find yourself going a bit backward.
Okay. Yeah. I've seen that quite a few times. Yeah. Yeah. I think you use that juicy flick quite a lot in between moves just to kind of connect moves
Yeah.
together as well.
Yeah.
Right.
It's also very good, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, when you realize the space is finished, like a very small bundle like this, you can't go forward and that, or there is a wall. You just do that, and it's not just like you stopped.
Yeah.
You're still connecting, you're still going, you're still doing things.
Uh-huh.
And I love that trick, yeah.
I think another cool one as well is like a split S, because I know it's like very basic, but to start, you can kind of do quite a lot with
Yeah,
split S.
that's
You know,
very true.
just in splitting into gaps
Yeah.
and things like that. Yeah, I think, and
It's
it's not
very useful
too
for
difficult.
cinematic as well.
Yeah, useful for cinematic as well, just for starting a cool cinematic sequence to split
Yeah.
S dive
A
into it.
dive, yeah.
Yeah, I see it used quite a lot for like chasing cars and things like that.
Yeah, still
Or
very
waterfall
popular, yeah.
dive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think personally you're one of the best that I've seen, like, to make proximity flying look very easy, especially because I've flown with you a lot and I'm in the same spots as you are. And sometimes I don't understand how you can do some of the tricks in such a tight area. Like this one, for example, is super tight, small space, and you've done some crazy stuff here.
Thank you.
So how, what advice can you give generally for being comfortable in flying in small proximity areas like this,
Right.
doing freestyle, doing troops?
My secret, let's say, I don't think it's a big secret, but that's the key, I think, for me has been, is during the simulator practice. A lot of people in simulator kind of fly normal spaces. I always try for every map in the simulator to find the smaller place, the tightest place, and really like explore the map and figure out where you cannot fly. And that's where you want to fly.
Right.
So I remember at the beginning I started with Velocidrone, and there was a map that was meant for very tiny drone, for tiny VOOP, I think they're called yet.
Yeah.
And it was inside the house. I remember I got obsessed of flying a 5-inch drone in there, and it was very frustrating at the beginning, but I get used to it. But in general, try to find a very difficult to fly spot, and that will translate. When you go out, then you have the muscle memory, then you experience those problems that arise in this scenario.
Okay.
And just, in general, try to, when you do tricks, try to keep it tight instead of do like very big matty flip or very big power loop, etc., etc. Just try to keep it tight around the corner or around the obstacle or whatever it is.
And that will just make you feel comfortable in tight spaces.
Yeah.
'Cause that's like, for someone like me who's very basic with freestyle, that's whenever you come to like a proximity place like this, it's crazy that you can, especially with a 5-inch, feel like you're from one side to the other in a second.
Oh yeah.
So just having that like fine control, I guess, is the key, isn't it? And
Yeah.
like always, I guess, always being ready for the next thing as well. I don't know, like
Yeah.
the next trick. Like otherwise, you kind of feel like you're caught off guard and you can crash after doing a
Right.
trick. Whereas you kind of need to do one and then be ready for the next thing that you want
Right.
to do, I guess. Yeah.
And also a bit of sending it. I think I didn't
Yeah.
say this from a long time, but
Yeah.
sometimes you don't have time to think, so you just send it there and react, right?
And how much of it do you think, like some of the best things that you've done, how much of that do you think is like based off of luck as well? Like sometimes like
Absolutely.
hitting a gap.
I like
through
to
luck.
think, like I always say this, like luck doesn't exist. It's all about probability.
No.
Because you
Right.
think about, even here, how much of the surface area is the obstacle and how much is the gap. So you actually have more probability of making the gap than hitting the obstacle.
But it's funny because when you're in the goggles,
Right.
it looks so much smaller.
Right.
Uh,
But yeah, I guess you increase your probability. You do it with practice and repetition, and you will crash. Just
Uh-huh.
do it again.
And I guess an art of freestyle as well is not just crashing and thinking like that's it. Like there's a chance that you can actually recover
Yeah.
from hit. Like for example, we've got the beams here. Hitting a beam, unless you hit it in a very like nasty way, hitting a beam does not equal your flight is over. Like if you can hit it and then recover from it, you carry
Right.
on, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then that automatically makes you think like, okay, if this space is even bigger than I thought, because hitting something, unless it's go straight into a brick wall, hitting something does not equal end of flight.
Yeah, not
Not fun.
necessarily, but yeah, it's also dangerous because here a few times we had some dangerous moment where I didn't disarm and almost flew on us. Whoa. Sorry.
New era. Here we go. New era. Yeah.
Do you use any kind of hypersmooth or rocksteady, or do you recommend that pilots use that?
So as I started, I say the first 2 years, I was still using the Euro 7.
Uh-huh.
It's a long time ago.
First generation of hypersmooth.
The first generation Hypersmooth, I think
Yeah.
that was perfect. And I was using Hypersmooth, so as I started, yes. That was mainly to get away with like little vibration, especially like I wasn't changing props very often.
Yeah, exactly.
So of course having like beaten up props, and honestly I didn't have the best tune or whatever. So it was just like a quick help for that. And it helped like to have a broader audience, I think, because people maybe don't realize the majority of people don't fly hardcore freestyle and they don't like it, I guess. So
I'm one of those, to be honest. Like
Right.
I would rather watch a freestyle video that's smooth, even if it means you use hypersmooth,
right,
than somebody who has very shaky
right.
footage and they're not using hypersmooth. Like
Yeah.
I just don't see the benefit.
Yeah, no, exactly. Honestly, personally, after a while, I think I was always smooth enough because at the time that I took off hyper smooth, I didn't see a big difference with the new props, with broken props, yes, for sure. But a lot of people like were, giving you bad comments if you use hyper smooth, especially in the freestyle community. Those people are more hardcore and they think that you shouldn't use hyper smooth. And honestly, after the Euro 8, Euro 9, the hypersmooth for me was too strong in a way that it was taking away speed.
Right.
So it was looking slower.
Okay.
Always is cropping the video.
Right.
So it was a bit annoying. So after that, I took it off. Now I've like few years at least completely off. And I like it. He has more video, doesn't crop it so much. People don't annoy you so much because you use hypersmooth. And
Like you said, that's only like a small percentage of people.
yeah, small percentage, and definitely you need to put up a bit of expo and maybe be a bit more careful. But I don't think it's a big deal. So I advise you like to do as you please. And if you are more into the cinematic, don't think twice. Just go with the hypersmooth or real steady or whatever.
So like a lot of the videos that you made, the short flight videos with lots of tricks and stuff for Instagram and for YouTube Shorts, they've got like thousands of views. But then there was one that you made that like just blew up and got 2.5 million views on YouTube, and I think, I don't know, probably lots more on Instagram.
Facebook, I think,
Facebook,
has 15
Instagram.
million.
So like altogether, it got you many thousands of followers with Instagram, YouTube. I think you probably got like what, close to 20,000 in total with all the. So what do you think it was about that viral video, the line that you shot in the house bando here in the UK? What do you think it was about that video in particular that people just absolutely loved?
Right.
And got you so many admirers and followers?
Right. There are a few things I might think about. In general, I think nothing in particular, as I think there are more than 5 videos that I've done that are way better than that.
Yes, it's funny.
Yeah, it's like there are videos that go viral where they just crash, you know.
Yeah, that's true as well.
So
Yeah.
that brings me to the point. I think that the algorithm does its own magic,
Uh-huh.
but there are some points I think I can grab. So first of all, it was a very nice sunny day, and I think I nailed the ND filter
Nailed the
settings.
exposure, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point. It's important, yeah.
That was great. So the quality when you actually upload it
Yeah.
is very nice when you have like a very sunny day, and it doesn't look bad quality. It's a very high quality. You think about it, there is like a very huge tree where I'm flying inside it in a certain sense, right?
Yeah.
And then I go inside the house. So there's this kind of opposite thing, like the tree and inside the house.
Yeah.
And the tree is very huge, so it's already itself is something to see, a drone flying inside a tree, because usually you avoid it.
A massive tree.
Yeah.
With all the branches.
Very massive.
Yeah.
And then I went inside with this kind of corkscrew power loop or split S, whatever, then power looped it, and towards the end of the video I met it flipping 2 times the 3 branches.
Yeah.
So I think the combination of
It all just came together.
Yeah.
And it looked very intentional. It looked like
Yeah.
you'd planned it. All that.
Yeah, that was all instinct.
Yeah,
Like that's
right.
what I like, is like just you feeling it in the moment when you get in that flow state. You just do it and express yourself. And I think another good point might be honestly, I don't know, but I like the cheering. There was like those guys, probably they were watching on the go.
And I like that as well when you hear some of the raw sound,
Right.
like of not just the drone, but like people in the background, the commentary, like the wow, oh my god, they made it, and all that kind of stuff. Like I love hearing that as well.
Yeah, it was good. It wasn't excessive. It was very natural. It wasn't planned.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I like it. It was nice. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what helped it to like just propel it
Yeah.
to the front of the algorithm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think probably one day again, once you restart
Yeah.
again, because you've been studying and doing all that stuff,
right.
once you get back into it, you'll want to try and hit something again like that maybe
Right.
one day.
Yeah. We'll see. Surprise.
Nice one, man. All right, guys, that's all I've got in this video. It was a long one. If you made it this far, wow, incredible. And thank you so much for watching. I'm going to see you in the future for some more FPV content. Take care.